From Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Art Works On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home in what we affectionately call upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and today we welcome local musician and artist Kristin Norderval. As both a composer and a singer, Kristin is inspired by hybridity, interactivity, and the idea that everything we do is site-specific. In her operas, chamber works, sound installations, and music for dance and theater, she blends acoustic and electronic sound, detuned instruments, voices, machines, and the acoustic resonance of space. Having trained in both composition and classical voice, Kristin first earned her living as a soprano soloist with a focus on contemporary music, particularly American composers. She has performed on recorded works by and often alongside composers Philip Glass, John Cage, Pauline Oliveros, George Crumb, and many others. Returning to composition after her 40th birthday, she continued to focus on the voice as her primary sonic material. Her solo CD of her work, Oral Histories, was listed by The New Yorker as one of the 10 notable classical music recordings of 2012. Her opera, The Trials of Patricia Isasa, won Quebec's Opus Prize for Best Contemporary Music and Best Production. Kristin holds a PhD in Artistic Research from the Oslo National Academy of Arts, Academy of Opera in Norway. Folks, do you even have to meet her after that? You just want to go out and find more about her. Well, we have her here for you today. We're so thrilled. We're going to talk to her about her work and so much more. But first, let's listen to an excerpt from one of her pieces. Well, what a way to start an episode with some opera. And, well, thank you, Kristin, for being here. Welcome to Inwood Art Works On Air.
Thank you so much, and thank you for what you do with Inwood Art Works, because it's really changed the neighborhood and the cultural space
Thank
in
you.
this area of Manhattan, of
Well,
upstate Manhattan.
Upstate Manhattan. Yeah, that's our fun way of saying
Yeah,
it, poking
yeah.
fun at ourselves. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, it's, I created it based off of, you and people like you. I just was, you walk down the street and you hear someone rehearsing and you're going, gosh, we're such a incredibly talented neighborhood. I have to go downtown and out of town, though, to see them or hear them or work myself if I'm an artist. Geez, would it be nice to have something local? And, it's kind of based on the premise of why go downtown?
Right.
Why go
And
downtown?
I moved here in 1987 to go to Manhattan School of Music, do a DMA in voice, and it really was. You had to go downtown, and you had to go to at least the Columbia area
Right.
to be working, rehearsing, doing stuff. So it's really nice to have some focus locally.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
And I do feel like, and I appreciate you being on the podcast, being, I will say, an Inwood local, if you will. I consider myself as one. I didn't move here in the 80s, but I moved here in the early 2000s. So I've been here for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I've seen a generation or two change now. And it is fascinating. And there is a reverence for, the great artists that are here. And I want to keep that going through this podcast. So this podcast is kind of like, it's like half documentary. And also it's like, the people who lived when, but also it's a great to uplift the people who are here.
Absolutely.
And celebrate that. So thank you for being part of that celebration. And speaking of, we just listened to an excerpt from The Trials of Patricia Isasa, an opera with music by yourself and a libretto by Naomi Wallace, which I'm sure people know. It's a touching and tremendous story based on the life story of the Argentine architect and human rights activist Patricia Isasa. It's not your usual fodder for material for musicals or operas, for that matter. So, what about her story spoke to you to turn it into an opera?
Yeah, it's a big question.
It is. Well, it's a big opera.
It's a big
and
opera.
it's like the why. You know what I mean? It's like it's.
Yeah, the big why. I saw Patricia Isasa speaking on Democracy Now!, which is one of my favorite news programs with Amy Goodman. I've followed her ever since it was even just on the radio. And I just was so taken by this woman's courage, life spirit, and still retaining, in a way, a sense of humor after what she had been through, which in short was, as a teenager, at 16 years old, in the Argentine period of the military dictatorship. So Patricia Isasa is a bit younger than me, but anyway, she was 16 at the time when she was doing political stuff in high school, and she was kidnapped and disappeared. 2 years, her family didn't know where she was. During those 2 years in the concentration camps that they had set up for dissidents, she was tortured and raped, and she survived in part through a love story with another female prisoner. And just the strength it took to survive that, and there weren't that many people who were disappeared who survived, so it's a special category. 33 years later, after that kidnapping, she got her day in court in Argentina. And this was an incredible, she knew this was going, she had started to do research on trying to figure out, okay, where was this that I had been taken away to, right? Because she didn't know prisoners were blindfolded, everything was secret. Who was behind it? How do you find the records? So she had already done a tremendous amount of research, gone to Spain with her case, and talked to anyway, she had done all this research, and over 5-hour testimony ended up putting very powerful people, political figures, in jail through her testimony. So the mayor of her hometown, the chief of police, a federal judge, folks that had been behind torture and disappearance in her particular case, but also in many other cases. And somebody who had worked with the CIA also, because there was American complicity in that time. And after she won her case, she didn't just go home. She's out working on other human rights
Very much of an advocate.
advocacy and talking about her case and other people's cases. And I had done an earlier work that was looking at how people are kind of how you get complicity or how you get people to go along with things that are actually illegal. How do you get a society to go along with things like disappearances and torture? Because I was so upset around Abu Ghraib. I was so upset around the lack of accountability for our torture that was happening in Abu Ghraib, in Guantanamo, in dark sites around during the whole period after the Iraq invasion and, the invasion itself. And so I'd learned a lot about torture. I'd learned a lot about groupthink. But those earlier pieces, like Welcome to Paradise, a Requiem, which was done in Norway, another work on surveillance, and another work on kind of just groupthink in general. They were very, very dark, and I felt like I was attracted to Patricia's story as a hopeful example of, okay, if you think that there's no possibility for accountability, you have to just pull out the lens and have a longer timeline and realize, okay, it might take decades, but it is possible that it will come.
Yeah.
So that was my impulse in working on the story. And I started working on it. I just took cold contact with Patricia first to say, can I use your story and do something in some way? I didn't know what it was going to be. I thought maybe it would be a concert piece with percussion and piano. And I had this idea of the trash piano from the very beginning. But it turned out that it needed a much bigger form. I started working on it as a concert piece, and it was just like, no, this really needs the big storytelling, and I need to bring in somebody who can write the libretto in a way that it will be the big storytelling. And so I contacted Naomi Wallace cold, too. I'd read a whole lot of her pieces, and I really liked her language, and I could see that she had a way to deal with political subjects in a very personal way, to bring it back to the human beings, not just the abstract. And she was very generous and said yes to my request. Would you be interested in doing a workshop? No obligations to go further if we don't get along or see that we have something here. And she said, yeah. So, and I had funding from Norway, and I'm very lucky. I have a dual citizenship and access to Norwegian arts funding. So that's where that workshop development started.
Yeah.
And it went from there, and it took about 5 years to do the whole thing. And when we premiered in Montreal, it was the spring of 2016. And in the fall of 2016, I was devastated by the election results that we had, because one of the things that I've always, or I had previously always felt, was if people have information about what's going on, the injustices will be addressed. And I don't have that feeling anymore. And so it's really in some ways changed even how I approach music. But Yeah, I don't know. It's a big question, but it was a very, very good project to do.
Well,
And yeah.
the reason I start with that, you think I would end with this project because it's such a great thing, but because I feel like we are. I mean, I'm hopefully I pay attention to the times myself, and I think it's a very relevant piece for today as we speak. And and is there a Spanish translation of it as well? I'm just curious because, like, boy, wouldn't that be something?
You know, we had a Spanish translation as side titles when we did it in Montreal,
Right.
and a French translation. So they were
Sure.
both going up for that public. And I have recently worked with someone to create a Spanish translation for the sung version, but it's in process,
Yeah.
and it's one of my goals.
Boy, I
is
think
to
it'd be
get that
very
out.
powerful. Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, boy. I think it's
Yeah.
like I said. Before we began, I told her I have watched it because we took on Conversation, and there's a video out there, by the way, on her website you can check out. And yeah, it's a very moving and powerful piece, and lots of great visuals to go with the story, of course. And of course, nothing's ever good as being there live in person, but I couldn't be. So I hope there's another opportunity to do it.
I would hope so too.
And I
Yeah.
think just being in the multilingual community, the diaspora of Washington Heights, Inwood that we are, I think could be really resonant to appear or somewhere in a community that has more. I don't know how strong Montreal's ties are to the South American communities.
There
but
was an Argentine community,
that's
and a
right.
lot of them came out, and
great.
we're very thankful that we
Yeah.
had this. And Patricia herself came. I mean, she was part of the process during the libretto writing, giving feedback. I went with the first draft of the full libretto to her in Buenos Aires,
Yeah.
and we went through things, and she, gave her comments, and she came to a workshop in Norway. So it was really moving to have her there for the premiere, and she did a lot of interviews, gave background information.
Like I said,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. It's a really powerful piece,
Yeah, well,
and
thank you.
hopefully we can get it up again to get people to see it
Yeah.
and enjoy it. Let's zoom out a little bit. As I mentioned in your bio, you've had an accomplished career as a singer. But what made you focus on composing? Is it you gave 40 as like the break date? It's like did the switch get turned, or just curious because you had such a still do a very accomplished soprano. But just curious.
Thanks. Yeah, that's also an interesting question. I started composing as a young person around 10, 11, and I was singer-songwriter. Okay, so I'm old enough that I grew up.
You were
in
Joni Mitchell.
Yeah, exactly. Well, she was a one of my idols or whatever. But actually, I'm old enough. I was growing up during the Vietnam War. Those newscasts made a huge impression on me. I was very drawn to all the folk singer types, Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan, Buffy St. Marie, Odetta. Odetta was enormously moving to me. And the first performer experience I had was being the youngest member of an anti-war group in Seattle. When I was learning guitar and playing folk songs and anti-war folk songs. And then I started writing, and I was composing, songs that were naive and as a young person. But anyway, that was my beginning, and also with piano and voice. And there were several things that happened that put a different trajectory on that. One is I came out quite early as lesbian as a teenager. I was also a survivor of gender-based violence. And so in that awareness of sort of systems that I already had, though the use of voice for giving voice, not only just singing, but actually, telling different kind of stories, it had been important to me. But when I was dealing with the trauma of attack, I lost that voice, and I was kind of silent. It stopped my singing, songwriting. It stopped my singing. For 2 years, I worked in a rape crisis center in Toronto and a crisis center in Seattle before I went to college. And then gradually kind of getting back on my feet, going into the training in the undergraduate program at the University of Washington, I needed this structure of learning counterpoint, harmony, all the rules, the big foundation, to kind of get my motor going again and give me a way to deal with things. Plus, I was suddenly discovering all these things like, oh, wow, okay, I used to love to improvise while I was vacuuming, or listen to the windshield wipers go out of phase, or listen to the car, the diesel car difference of the motor of that and something else. And machine, I always loved all those machines, and I would improvise with those things as a kid. And I was like, oh, here's these people like Cage and Oliveros and Parch and, Hildegard Westerkamp. And we were taking all those wonderful sounds and doing stuff with them. So it totally opened my horizons to do a composition degree and do a voice degree at the same time. But then at that time, it was also a very male-oriented business if you're going to try and get out into the composition world. I was one of 2 girls in my class, young women in my class of composition at the University of Washington. We were 3 by the time I graduated. And I didn't feel like I could dare to really bring what I was writing, because there were a lot of stuff that, like what came out in the opera for Patricia Isasa, So I just kind of, I didn't feel that there was a support for the kind of things that I wanted to really give voice to or express. That meant that I could earn my living as a singer was wonderful, because then I could explore other people's repertoire, I could explore old repertoire, I could bring my whole frame. But at a certain point, that also, the opera is not exactly a feminist space. And so I came up to places there where, oh my God, okay, I have to concentrate on new opera and developing things. And moving here in '87, not only was I able to work with amazing composers that were here, but there were suddenly like lots of women composers and lesbian composers who were out. Anea Lockwood, Ruth Anderson, and Eve Beglarian, and Anna Demska, and Pauline Oliveros.
You found your people.
It's just like, wow, there's my people. Okay, and it was very encouraging. And the first time I really came back to my composition was when Patricia Chiti, who was a singer who had a festival in Italy, took a chance on me, and she'd heard me sing some songs that I wrote as an undergraduate, and she invited me in to do a commission for a festival in Italy. And I did this piece, and it was just this sort of outpouring of emotions about traumas that you keep in your body, that you remember even if you're not articulating it or thinking about it in other ways. And it was using Hildegard quotes, and it was a breakthrough for me. So that allowed me to come back to it. And After 40 basically was also a time where we're going into 9/11, and I felt like I needed to find or create the repertoire that I didn't see.
Yeah.
Or I didn't know.
Well,
yeah. So that was a long answer to your question.
That's a great answer. No, I love it. I love it. And I'm a big fan of create the work you want to see.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that
Well, that was
you're
the
living
necessity.
proof of that, right?
Yeah.
So that comes through it. I want to shift gears slightly uh, from your compositions because it's a more, but it's still related to your creation though, coming from you because has direct correlation to the decades of your past work. You spent the last 4 years doing a PhD in research at Oslo National Academy,
Hmm.
and you developed an expanded vocal improvising instrument.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us more about this? I mean, so it's like
Sure.
creation keeps manifesting for you.
So I have to name Pauline Oliveros here again because she was really instrumental in allowing me to risk improvising. I had before that I'd always called it trying things out before I put them down as a composition. But to try things out and have it be the thing right there and live in front of people, that took her encouragement, and also the work with the deep listening meditations that allowed you to go into that space of presence. So I started after working and taking her workshops and retreats. I started working with live sampling with what was at that time she was calling expanded instrument system. She used an array of lexicon delay units, and then it was transformed to max patches. And David Gamper and Stuart Dempster, who were in her deep listening band, they all had these processing systems. David Gamper was really generous in allowing me to try out the pedal systems and the max patches, and I went, wow, okay, I want to learn that. And it was a really heavy learning curve to learn max MSP, but I was able to do lessons with Daphne Naftali here in New York at Harvest Works, and that changed the way I started, creating music. And I had early in that time had the idea, I want to be able to have some kind of controller system to experiment with this. But the technology at that time, it was a DIY MIDI glove with flex sensors and buttons, triggers on my belt, and I had to wear a sender receiver for the wireless stuff. There was lots of wires up, and I used it for a few projects, but it was bulky. Mm-hmm. And it was very high tech, and I'm gonna.
It was cumbersome.
It was cumbersome, and so I went back to just standing behind the computer if I was doing live processing, but I still had this idea. And so when I got a chance to apply for this research fellowship, I thought, okay, I'm gonna really see if I can explore now this idea of being able to control live processing away from the computer. So I'm not dependent on standing behind a computer, because it's hard to do opera about standing behind a computer.
Right.
It's very limited. Yeah. So I wanted to be able to move, and I wanted it, whatever the controllers that I chose, to be not give us automatic sci-fi thing, because that doesn't always fit with every opera piece either. Mm-hmm. So what I ended up doing was exploring a lot of different kind of controllers, leap controllers, cameras, a different kind of hot hand, and I ended up using the Genki Wave MIDI rings, which send Bluetooth to the computer, and they're measuring hand position on 3 axes, so pitch, yaw, and roll. And they have 3 buttons that you can program in different ways. So I had
3's a lot better than finding them all over your body.
Yeah, right. And they're easy to touch, and I could in the max patch say, okay, it's going to be. They would recognize trigger or hold press or double click, and do different things. So suddenly it was really a question of, okay, what can I remember in this processing because I'm not looking at the computer screen.
Right.
What can I hear and sense somatically, and how much control do I have? And it's the kind of system where because I'm not looking, I have to estimate. I know where the minimum delay is and the maximum delay is, but everything else is a search. So that's where it becomes a kind of, I have to respond to what I get back. So that is really my improvising partner.
Yeah, because message sent, message received.
Right.
I mean, it's
Right.
your basic.
Right.
Yeah.
So it
conversation.
will never be exactly the same,
Right.
but I have the approximate types of processing that I expect I will be able to get. Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, and people listening probably going, "Huh?"
Yeah.
But you know what? It's not everybody though. And I think what's really interesting is that it allows you to merge the compositional aspects of transforming electric sound with the performance aspects of your singing, and I think that's the crux. You know what I mean? Right? That's where it's at, and. So my question is, as a small, tiny follow-up, obviously you've used it. Have other people tried it out, and what have been their experiences?
Yeah. So in this opera, the last opera that I did a year ago, I had two other soloists in addition to myself, and they each used the rings in their portions of the opera. And they didn't have as much time as I had it, right?
Obviously.
So it had to be simpler
Yeah.
in the ways that they were using it in the opera. But I've also done workshops, and I'm surprised that people are able to work with it pretty quickly, and it really shows. Well, one is you have to be comfortable with the unexpected and not having control. So it's a kind of a Zen thing, what do you have control over, and what don't you have control over?
It's like being on stage when you don't have other things. It's just like you kind of have to let it go, right?
Yeah, and it's like life,
Yeah.
how do we respond to what we're
Yeah.
getting? So
You're present.
it's been really fun. It's been fun to
cool.
workshop it, and it's been interesting to write for. If I'm wanting something very specific that I compose, usually that line is just separate from whatever is going to be done with the rings. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, it does make sense, and I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating, and so I think it's important. I'm going to try because everyone's like, "Okay, Aaron, you guys have talked about it, but that doesn't make anything hide nor hair of it," I think there's the phrase of it. And so I said, so I want to leave folks with a newer selection from your Ovra that features your performer controlled interactive vocal processing interface. So this is a performance excerpt from Possessed from Crane Reflex on a Favor. So can you set the stage, introduce the folks about this hybrid opera that they're going to see here
Okay.
and listen
So
to?
Crane Reflects on a Favor is my inspiration from a Japanese folktale that I was working on another opera that is in process but not done, called The Sailmaker's Wife. And I'm seeing these two as kind of a diptych, like they'll go together eventually, maybe. I hope so. But in the original folktale, it's one of these folktales where a human does a non-human living animal a favor, and they come back in human form to return the favor. And in that folktale, the crane that comes back as a woman is able to weave these magical fabrics that takes a poor sailmaker out of his poverty, but then he has to encounter all the problems of richness, like including being tempted by greed and other people's greed, and it doesn't end very well. My response to this story was that there's a kind of, if you look at an extractive mentality, extracting both labor from humans and things from the earth without thinking what is sustainable is problematic. So I took the Crane character as the woman in 3 stages of her life, or of this story. The first stage was, I'm coming here, I'm offering you this of my free will because I want to return the favor, I want to help you. The second stage was, now you're asking, you're extracting stuff from me, it's not feeling good because you're trying to get more than you want, than is okay, I'm really tired. And the third stage was, I'm trapped. I have nowhere to go. I have no way to. This is the end of my resources, and that's where this possessed comes from. And the lines in possessed are actually, there are some lines that are drawn from a very early legal treatise that asked if trees have legal standing, and that early legal treatise is actually being used now in various legal cases to bring environmental law to the fore.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Pretty
do
amazing.
rivers have standing? Do, natural environments have standing to say this makes harm?
Yeah.
So that's the background.
Love it. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy Possessed from Crane Reflects on a Favor.
I am possessed, possessed. Pray, pray, pray.
that was beautiful. It's a mournful and meaningful tale as well. I know you have a variety of concerts and projects, and you do a lot of international travel for your work. So, what is your current focus now? Like, where are you heading off to? Not today, but like in the foreseeable future, what are you working on?
Well, I'm doing more with the expanded vocal improvising instrument because I'm still fascinated to explore its limits. So I've done some duo work with Miguel Frasconi, who lives in Connecticut but is known quite a bit in New York. Plays glass instruments beautifully, virtuosic glass improviser and composer, and we'll be doing a concert in the summer in San Francisco at the Chapel of Chimes.
Very cool.
Solstice, and we're looking at building some other concerts around that. I have some other duo partners in various parts of the world, the Netherlands and in Norway and Germany.
You're big in Norway, I know that for a fact.
Yeah, so looking at that. And I have some commissions that are being asked of me for writing for other ensembles.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Well, we look forward to seeing how those all those projects manifest, and we'll try to send people your way for concerts and things like that.
Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you for being part of this community. And I'm curious, you've been a long-term resident now. You probably lived here longer than anywhere else, maybe. Has the neighborhood informed you in your writing and in your composing? Anything at all?
Yeah. I mean, one thing is I just love walking in the park,
Sure.
so I know all the trails in Inwood Park
Yep.
by heart, and that connection there keeps me really grounded.
Yeah.
The sounds probably work their way in. Also, I feel like I have been through a lot of difficult things, and there's a certain heaviness in much of my repertoire, but I am getting to the point, especially with the rings, where I feel like I'm able to play more. So I'm having fun.
Maybe a comedy in our future, but never know. You'll throw everybody off.
Right.
Well, we're so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for all your contributions. We look for more great music ahead from you. And where can we send people to find more about your work?
Oh, my website, which I have to work on keeping up to date more, But anyway, there's a lot of stuff there. KristinNorderval.com.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
Listeners, you have your marching orders, okay? Very good. Thank you again, Kristin.
Thank you so much.
Absolute
It's been
pleasure.
a pleasure.
This is Inwood Art Works On Air. That's your Artist Spotlight edition, where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes that make their home here, and particularly Inwood, but also Upper Manhattan, of course. If you have a moment, please show us some love right now and rate this podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We greatly appreciate that. Many thanks to the Church of Good Shepherd here for hosting us, and also to HeightSites.com for uptown promotional support. You can support On Air and all of our programming by making a tax-free donation, if you'd be so kind, to Inwood Art Works On Air. Be sure to follow us on social media, keep up all that we do, which includes the Inwood Film Festival, Filmworks Al Fresco, pop-up art galleries, live performances, and so much more. Inwood Art Works On Air is very proud to be supported in part by public funds from the New York State Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and Inwood Art Works programming is made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Art Works On Air.